Hey everybody, this is Joel. I'm down at Boom Comics in Topeka, Kansas, and I have a writing project. I want to put a book together. I'm going to talk just a little bit at first, just very dryly, about how the Dryden experiment works, so that you can understand the context that I'm talking about. And then I'm going to get into the book that I actually want to develop. What I'm talking about is a short story collection that I would like to publish under Dryden Home, which is the publishing company that I own. And it is a paid contract, but I do a no advance and print on demand. So what happens is we put the book into production. The revenue split is 50% of the net profit off of the book to the authors and artists. So if it's one author or artist, they would actually take home 50% of the net, and then however many we actually in, that's how your split will work. I pay biannually, and I pay anytime somebody's got over $40. So that's just to give you a very nuts and bolts kind of introduction to the kind of production I'm talking about. I go through Kindle and Amazon, and then distribution ends up everywhere else too. So like well, the other electronic publishers don't pick us up, but Barnes and Noble and folks like that do. So, not a lot of shelf space. I'm not going to put books on a lot of shelves, except probably here at Boom Comics, but a lot of availability online. All right, so that's just a very quick and dirty. I'll come back to all of that later, but I wanted to be right up front. I'm looking for authors to participate in a short story collection. That's what the revenue looks like. So to back up now a little bit and give you a little bit of explanation of where we are, the Dryden experiment, which is the universe that this short story collection is going to be set in, is a Creative Commons science fiction universe. And what we've done is we've built faster than light travel rules, we've built planets, we've built thousands of years of history. We have an entirely new civilization that has sprung up based on an author in Australia here in the last couple of weeks. And we put the whole thing under the Creative Commons 4.0 licensing structure. It's the 4.0 BYSA license for those of you who'd like to look it up, and I encourage you to do so. In fact, I'll put the link below. I'm going to make a note to myself. Um, so, what that allows us to do, the fact that we've got this entire science fiction universe with thousands of years of history, millions really, if anybody wanted to write that far out, is that all of us who like to create, like to draw, like to build games, like to build videos, like to write stories, have a big environment that is supported by a lot of other authors and artists to do it in. We're not just kind of out there by ourselves. And because we have a real easy access to the market these days through boutique publishing and Android markets for games and for electronic games and shelves like that for board games, we're actually able to take those things into market. And we're not a big publisher. We don't sell millions of copies or anything like that. But what we do is have a whole lot of fun and actually make a little bit of money. And really the only rule is that anything that you make using this stuff that comes from our universe has to also be put under that Creative Commons license. So if somebody else wants to come riff on your stuff, they're free to do so. For example, if I write a book and somebody says, that book can make a kick-ass game, they go ahead and make the game, right? And they have to acknowledge that Dryden did it. They have to put it in the rights, but they don't actually have to pay me for the planet or the people or whatever the intellectual property was. They're free to use that stuff as long as they make anything that they add available also under the Creative Commons. All right, so that's what the Dryden experiment is. And I founded the Dryden experiment a couple of years ago. It's pretty fun project. I've really had a blast doing it. And Dryden is actually sort of surviving on its own. We're trying to put it under a not-for-profit now so that it can stay free and open to everybody. And what I've started doing is running Dryden House, which is a publishing company off on the side that doesn't own the Dryden experiment, but publishes mostly materials that come out of Dryden. We're not the only folks that publish stuff that comes out of Dryden, but we're pretty close to the market, obviously. So what we do, for example, I bought a short story collection from Laura Conrad that happens very, very early in the future of the Dryden experiment. There's a war here on Earth called the Extermination War, and Laura's stories are set during that. Owlman Press is developing the role-playing game for the Dryden experiment, and they wanted to do the EPUB rights, but weren't very interested in trying to publish a print book. So I'm going to do the print version of the book while they do the electronic version, the role-playing game, while I I do the print version of the role-playing game. So we are a publishing house that exists sort of on the side of the Dryden Experiment. And I'm looking for a very specific story, and it's a story that we really kind of need to tell. The very first story that was ever written that could be described as a Dryden Experiment story was called The Bride of Europa. I wrote it and I sold it to Alien Skin magazine many years ago. Um, and it's sort of the seed. It doesn't really exist anymore in the universe, but I really love that story, and it's what got me thinking about the Creative Commons model, and it's where the name Dryden comes from. Unfortunately, that story has rights that are strung out all over everywhere. Froggy Bottom Press has non-exclusive rights to it. Another publishing company may have non-exclusive rights to it. I've never been able to sort out what happened when they got bought, blah, 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 blah. So I still own that story, but it can't be just Dryden's. And I want the things that are in Dryden not to be owned by, whoever. Nobody who's got a stock market ticker number should ever own a part of the Dryden Experiment, is sort of my feeling. I suppose eventually they will, but we really like being indie, and so I want to retell the story of the Europan specifically for the Dryden Experiment so that it is our own. And I think the best way to do that is to not write it myself, to have some other folks come in and write it. And I read this book that I really enjoyed. I have no idea what the name of it was, but it was this really interesting publishing experiment. What they did was they created a fantasy city. It was set in a desert, and people in turbans and those big scimitar swords and stuff. And they established the government and sort of what was going on in the city, and I don't know what all boundaries they put on it. And then they invited 7 or 8 fantasy authors to come in and write a short story, and they never reconciled the stories. Each of the story was this particular author's interpretation of what had happened in the city. They told different vignettes from around the city, and just the change in flavor from story to story, and the change in style, and sort of the assumptions about how things would work that each one of the authors made was really interesting. It was almost as interesting as the stories themselves, to be moving back and forth in this supposedly single environment. So my idea for how to solve this problem of how to have this story about the Europan become its own and a part of Dryden is to open it up in the same kind of way. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for submissions to participate in a short story collection that describes events in the year 2600, and I'm going to tell you what happens in 2600, but just like that other book, I'm going to tell you in general what happens in 2600, and then I'm going to encourage people to submit stories. And if I can get about 45,000 words worth of good short story about the rise of the Europan, I'm going to publish it. And I'll do the revenue split that I spoke of before. I'll probably buy the cover art outright. I'll find somebody whose art I like, and just I pay like $25 for a cover image, you guys. I'm sorry, Dryden's not that big, but I'll probably buy the cover art outright, and then the revenue split, I'll offer a contract for the revenue split for any of the authors that end up participating. And of course, if somebody surprises me with a piece of video or some other Dryden-y thing, people surprise you all the time in the Dryden universe, we'll roll with it. We'll figure out how to incorporate it, or if we can use it. But what I'm going to do now is speak for about 3 or 4 minutes about what Europa looks like in the year 2600 and what happens. Most of the things that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to kind of assume that you know the Dryden universe a little bit, which is a mistake because I want to bring some new folks in. But what you'll find is we've got a Facebook page on WordPress. Doesn't have much on it, but you can take a peek out there if you'd like to see what we're doing. Most of the things that tell you what our universe looks like and how it works and what the timeline is like live in one of 2 places. They live on the Facebook author and artist page. That's where we all hang out and chat. So if you look in the notes section there, you can learn a whole lot about how the Dryden universe looks in terms of what happens in what year and blah, 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 how the different alien technologies work, etc., etc. And the other thing is right here on YouTube, we've got the channel Dryden Home, and Dryden Home has got 20-some videos about the Dryden universe, mostly me sitting right here in this room because I love to hang out with my friends at Boom. And you can learn a whole lot about how the universe works and get a lot of questions answered that way. And then, of course, I'm going to be available. I plan to comment here as we go forward with the development, and then I'll be available on YouTube I'm sorry, at my Yahoo account constantly, and I'll put that link below as well. Okay, so now that we've got an introduction and we know what we're doing, here is the environment that I am looking for 45,000 words worth of short stories about, and here's the story I need to tell. All right, in the year 2600, after several hundred years of apparently peaceful coexistence with humans, the alien species that is the single intelligence that rules Europa rises up one day, just literally no warning, takes over the planet, drives the humans off of the planet, and takes over human space for many solar systems around Earth. He takes over completely. And looking at the larger context of the Dryden experiment, there's another species that is a hybrid of human and whale species called Il Solitaire, and at about the same time, they start to take over human space too. It's a really crucial moment when the hard science part of our universe ends because these alien species take over, and we start the more exotic space opera part of our universe, which if you look at the 4 eras of Dryden that you'll find in some of the other videos and other materials, that'll make a lot more sense to you. But this is an important moment, and I want to tell it through a series of short stories. So what's happened is that apparently evolution on Europa resulted in just a single consciousness, a single entity. And I'm not going to physically describe that entity, except to say that Europa's got 40 feet of ice and then 5 or 10 kilometers of water. I'm sorry, 40 kilometers of ice, 5 to 10 kilometers of water, and the Europan actually lives somewhere clear down on the bottom of the ocean. I'm really going to resist telling you what he looked like in the original story because this is the new story, but it's a single consciousness. But what this consciousness does is he runs an entire ecosystem, okay? Everything that the Europan needs to survive is produced by a creature that the Europan designed. Okay, so maybe living on thermal vents, we've got all these kind of cool worms and sulfur-eating creatures and blah blah blah, and then we've got predators that harvest those, and we've got this entire ecosystem. But the deal is that entire ecosystem lives to feed the Europan. Okay, and when humans first arrive, which I think happens in about 2300, they burrow down into the ice because it's not safe to be on the surface. We've got a lot of radiation. We've got no atmosphere. It's a very dangerous place. But once you get a couple kilometers down inside the ice, you're really very safe. And when the Europan first meets the humans, he's never seen anything like it, doesn't have any reason to fear humans. Kind of makes friends with them. He doesn't talk to them except for very briefly right after they first land. He's not very interested in them. But what's happened is that humans have built a civilization of several billion people. They've burrowed all the way through the ice. They live in tunnels that are mounted under the ice, and they have free-swimming ships that move around location to location underneath the ice of Europa. And the change that has happened is that the Europan has realized that his life is in jeopardy. The changes in the ecosystem are getting pretty serious. The water's getting warm. We've got a lot of pollution going on. We've got just a growing number of humans. Humans tend to fight, and every time they have a fight, it damages the environment. It's bad for the Europan. And the Europan decides that he's got to drive them off planet. He's not really homicidal, he's not genocidal, he's not trying to kill all humans, but he decides he's got to get them off the planet. So what he does is he starts manufacturing weapons of war, except they are organic life forms. And absolutely the image that we're looking for is those cool little creatures that you see in the deep sea videos, you know, the little jellyfish with the smooth body and a little cilia that run along the edges, and the exotic, strange creatures that float in the very depths of the ocean, the strange things that look like spiders, except they've got 900 big, long, silvery legs. And this image of these aquatic creatures stays with the Europan clear until he's in space. When he gets spaceships, they are organic spaceships that still look like these aquatic creatures, except they take off into space from Europa and start taking over human space. And they're very effective at it. So we've got this kind of cool image of these, you know, jellyfish spaceships, however you want to work that out. That's up to you guys. But we do need to kind of keep this aquatic theme going clear until we get into space. So he does this in secret. He makes this decision that it's time to drive the humans off of Europa. He makes this change, and just one afternoon in 2600, the whole thing explodes. Okay, and within a matter of, let's say, a couple of weeks, there are no humans on Europa, and Europan spaceships headed out into the solar system to take over human space. So in order to tell the story from the day when things go wrong for the humans, the Europan decides to attack, till this moment when we take off into space, I would like to have 5 authors, 7 authors, however many authors it takes, write the short stories, the vignettes about what happens to different folks, okay? And I'm going to suggest stories, but that's totally just a suggestion, okay? I think that as you are hearing this, if you are interested in it, you will already have a kind of a story idea. Oh, wow, that cool scene if you were in the ice and the lights went out, or maybe the Europan would start boiling the ice, or I don't know, wherever you're going. If this is something you're interested in, put a comment below. Tell me the story you'd like to tell, and we'll start working on this process to get this story developed. So here are some things that I think that we need, or it might be nice to explore. I am intentionally leaving the look, the feel, the mind of the Europan completely up in the air. If somebody would like to tell a short story that's told from the perspective of the Europan before the attack or during the attack or whatever, excuse me, I would absolutely love to see that. Um, I need, or I would like to see a story that was the first time humans noticed there was anything wrong. Maybe they've got a monitoring station that watches the behavior of the Europan. Maybe somebody's having dinner on a cafe in an undersea environment, and all of a sudden, right? I'd like to see some freaky biotechnologies, Europan technologies that did weird things that I've never thought of. That if you were an undersea creature who had decided it was homicidal, you might do. I don't know, giant narwhal tusks, or I don't know, surprise me there. I would like to see humans mount a defense that gets overrun. I would like to have at least one kind of human interest story that was, the woman and her child trying to escape, who've been caught up in all of this and didn't mean to be a danger to the Europan, the kind of tell the human side. And we need to see the escape into space. It has to be successful, okay? Um, and so grab whatever that caught your attention. Let's see if we can put this thing together. The other kind of thing, two things that I kind of thought about mentioning, getting into this is. I think it would be cool to have an offbeat story that was maybe funny or humorous, kind of took it from a kind of an odd angle, the funny things that happen when things go wrong. I also thought it might be interesting to have one that sort of set up like a horror story, how very, very creepy these things that the Europan has built that are now hunting the ice tunnels, or I don't know what. But that's just some ideas. I really want to leave it wide open to folks to riff and find what it is that they'd like to develop, and then go on and develop it. So what we're going to do from here, that's the whole introduction. Um, I'm going to put my email below. It's drydenexperiment at Yahoo. That's drydenexperiment at yahoo.com. Put a comment below. Tell me you're interested in a story and what you think that story looks like. I'll write back. Send me a sample at Yahoo, and let's just get a conversation going between as many of us as we can get involved. And if we can get enough stories to pull this thing off, then we'll publish it maybe sometime in the fall. It's June 3rd today, and we'll maybe try to target for an October or November date to do a book called The Rise of the Europan. All right, you guys, I'm Joel. This is Boom Comics. It's always exciting to be talking about a new project. See you soon.